within your hosting, bear with me while I move that out of the way and I'll come back to it. Even outside of Joomla, if you've got your hosting provision set up, there are some settings you can make within there that will help. I've confused myself now by doing it this way around. So here we go. So that's what I get for not looking at the comments as soon as everybody starts typing. There we go. Lesson learned. So I'm using Plesk for my hosting at the moment, and we've got one setting in there. Oh, shush, watch. There we go. You've got a setting called Optimize Website, which basically lets you turn on compression of all content that's dished out by your server. So again, certainly worth checking. I'm sure Plesk and others have got similar things in there. That's just a little tweak to make sure you've got it. What I would also recommend you do is within there, make sure that in your file manager, whatever that may look like, in the root of your hosting, that you've got the htaccess file renamed. By default with Joomla, it comes as a file called htaccess.txt. Make sure you rename that to be .htaccess and take the .txt off the end. That allows you to do a few things later on for page speed that you can't do if that file's just left as a text version. So what else have we got in there? So that's the hosting side. Within Joomla, start with this one now we're on there. Within Helix Utimate 2, we've got some settings to compress CSS and JavaScript. They do advise at the moment on there to not use those. I don't, because I'm using a separate plugin for page speed at the moment. However, I've not found an issue with doing it this way on other sites. However, they seem to suggest that there's problems with using it. I might have to give that a test and see what happens. I have certainly found the Helix compression of JavaScript does on occasion cause problems with extensions that use JavaScript as well. Sometimes it stops them loading or makes them behave a bit strange, and I've normally left it turned off. However, the one to check that you do keep an eye on is once you've finished, your site's live, you've got no more settings to change within Helix, turn off compile SCSS to CSS, because it means every time your page is loaded, if anything's been changed or edited, it will reload and recompile all these files, and it obviously just adds a little to your page load times. So worth turning it off once you're finished. So that's the ones. I'm going to have a play with those and see. They do make quite an improvement to your page load times by turning on compression, and certainly Google will come back and shout at you if you check its page speed tests when you've not done that one. Hopefully you're all now seeing what I am supposed to be sharing. Thank you for that notice there. That'll teach me to not look. Within Joomla itself, we've also got a page cache available as a native feature. So within global config and then system, we've got a cache settings to turn on. Now I always leave it at default as file. Cache time is basically in minutes of how long the cache lives for. So what the cache does is every time somebody visits your website, if that page that they visit has been loaded before within the cache time, then your server and Joomla will serve out a pre-rendered HTML version of that page. It doesn't need to go back and check the database each time for changes, which obviously means there's a lower load on your server, which means it can dish out the site pages in a quicker time frame. Turning on platform specific means it will be clever enough to know what type of device you're on. So if somebody visits that page on a mobile or a tablet, it will have a cache for that specific page layout rather than just giving it the desktop one. We've got two types of caching to enable. We've got conservative and progressive. Apologies for those who are watching. I did go over this before till I realized I wasn't showing you my screen properly. The system cache has got off, or we then got conservative and progressive. I haven't found an issue on the majority of sites using progressive caching, except on my own, ironically, because the portfolio pages were so large, there was so many portfolio items, it caused an issue with the size of the cache, and it began to actually crash the site when it got too big. So I did end up changing what plugin I use. I don't use the native Joomla cache anymore, But if you have got an extremely large site, just keep an eye on how that behaves. You may find you need to turn it off or knock it down to the conservative level. As it mentions there, the progressive also adds the modules as well, whereas the conservative level doesn't. It keeps it a lot smaller. But again, if you've got a relatively normal site, that is really worth doing. It does increase the page speed or improve the page speed a lot when you turn all these things on. Be aware that you've got the settings in here, and you've also then got a plugin for the cache. If you go to your extensions and plugins and just search for cache, you've got the page cache for the system, which needs to be turned on. You can tell it to use browser caching as well if this is enabled, so you can tell the people's browsers that are looking at your website to cache the content. And you can also exclude menu items in here if you wish to. Sometimes you might have a contact page or a dynamic page that if you cache it, it actually stops that dynamic as working. I tended to find this was an issue with online forms such as contact forms, larger ones with RS Forms Pro. You can, if it's a module on a page, you can disable caching at module level, or you can literally just exclude the menu item itself from the drop down and just say, please don't cache those menu items, and it will not cache those ones in there. To be aware of, if you use the page cache and you make a change to one of your pages on the website, you will probably know if you've got a long cache lifetime, you can come back in and literally clear the cache by ticking the top box, hitting delete all, and that clears the cache so that when you reload that page, the changes come through. Does catch a few people out there, especially if you think you're editing a page and you go, where's my content? It's not showing up on the front end. It may well be because you've got your cache enabled and you've not cleared it within here, or the length of the cache lifetime is so big that it's not going to regenerate on its own for quite a while through. So what do I use for page speeds improvements now? I've started to use a plugin called JCH Optimize Pro. It's got an awful lot more within there than the native Joomla stuff has, although you can do some of this without it if you're up on it. I used to have a range of settings that I pasted into the htaccess file, which basically told browsers how long to retain content for from my website. So I could tell it to say, cache images in your browser for 7 days, CSS files and other stuff like that again. So that's another element where basically when somebody visits your website, they don't have to download that content from your server every time. If their PC's already been there before within that time frame that you've set, it will load those files from their hard drive basically, which again improves page load times. It also improves your server performance if you've got a busy site or lots of sites on there. It stops it having to dish out all that content to everybody else. So within JCH Optimize Pro, we've got a couple of settings in here to look at. So they've changed this very, very recently. This used to be in the plugin you had to go to. Now they've put some of it into the actual options within here. Within the component, they brought it down to component level. I personally find this a little bit less clear as what I'm doing, but there we are. That's what we've got. We've got to keep going with what we've got. If you click the Optimize htaccess button, it will update your htaccess file to leverage browser caching and gzip compression, which again is what I've mentioned before. What I didn't mention in global config is also to make sure you turn on at server level. So global config server, you want to enable gzip page compression. Again, it all helps keep things speedy. So Optimize htaccess, click that button. Literally, it will add to your htaccess file all the cache settings and stuff that it needs to for browsers. Click order plugin. That will make sure that the plugin is correctly loaded in the right order of page load. Otherwise, if you don't do that or you add something in and you need to come back, sometimes it can load at the wrong time and cause a few issues. Again, you can clear the cache here if you want. The rest of this I always do within the options of JCH. I find it just a little bit clearer to know what is going on. I don't think I've got any more comments yet from anybody else. Nope, all still there. I have no idea who's still got 5 viewers. Hello to everybody that's there today. So within all of the settings, You can't see my full download ID, so there we go. Again, we can exclude menu items and URLs as well. We can combine CSS and JavaScript and also do smart combine, which basically is an intelligent way of checking the whole site across it all and combining the CSS files and template files together as much as it can to keep it efficient when it dishes them out to the browsers. You can set the cache lifetime. You can now start to set the minification level of HTML. And again, it tells you exactly there what each one of those ones does. I've always left it on ultra. There's one or two sites, perhaps with an e-commerce site or something similar, where I have ended up dropping that down to basic or advanced, just to be sure it doesn't take out anything that those sites need to run. We can combine files as well, so I always leave it set at the default. So I leave it as static CSS and JavaScript and leave them that way. I've never needed to change that. I've never tested the different ones, to be honest, but certainly that one is what I use. I normally don't need to worry about try catch. I've left that off. And we can also then tell it what else we want to do from these. If you want to just mess around a little bit with these ones, you can tell it to take some of the extensions out, or include, do you want to include PHP and external files, that type of stuff. We can then, within the CSS settings themselves, again, start to tweak little bits and bobs if we wanted to. We can exclude specific CSS files. If for whatever reason we find there's a problem with a plugin or an extension, we can usually find its CSS in there, click it, and it'll exclude that from the compression. Again, same for the extensions, we can do that one. Style declarations, if you want, for whatever reason, sometimes that might be an issue. We can remove CSS files from loading. So some of those people that mentioned this before, if you know for definite, for example, that you're not using a pop-up or an animation part of this, whatever it may well be, then you can actually take that out and it will stop that CSS being loading. So again, the less CSS files you've got, the more efficient your page load times will be. I'm not aware of any that I can take out at the moment on here. It's difficult to judge sometimes exactly which ones these are, because it doesn't, you just got ... file path. Some of them, convert forms is obvious. Template CSS, I presume, is my template CSS file. Bits about that. You can as well, one of the things Google page speed sometimes throws up is Google font error. It seems to give you an error about its own stuff, which is really weird. It throws up the fact that you're pulling in external resources and shouts at you for doing it, whereas this setting here will actually fix that error and remove it. And it certainly does work, and I've been able to use that quite successfully. The one I don't use is this last one. It does actually help with page speed by enabling it, but what you tend to find is it causes a lot of jumping around. I find when you actually visit the site, it causes all these little bits and bobs to actually just randomly pull in to the page layout as it loads, and I don't like that very much. And the difference in page speed was so small that I've left it turned off. It says there, the smaller the number, the faster your site, but you might see some jumping off the page if the number's too small. I couldn't find a point where that actually was sensible, even at the higher levels, so I just left it off. Rightly or wrongly, you don't have to, you can do whatever you want, but that's what I use. JavaScript, again, we can play around with some of these ones and what we do with it. What I found, leaving all the default settings turned on to yes there, is I've got a range of exclusions to stop Google Tag Manager, and also the Tassos Convert Forms extension that also had issues doing it this way. So I've excluded those JS files from the plugin settings so that it actually just loads them in line at the top and doesn't move them around and compress them in the same way to fix that. So there's quite a few in there that actually allow all of this to work properly, certainly with the Google Tag Manager. Again, by default it was stripping it out and taking all the script stuff out. So I've left that into here now as an exclusion, which works fine. Again, making sure that it's not changing the order of the execution of those as well. to keep it all behaving and keeping Google happy with your tracking. You can, if you want to. There's a lot of options in here for images and stuff. Sometimes you'll get a complaint on Google PageSpeed about image height and width missing. So this actually will do that for you and add them as it thinks is correct. I've not had an issue with it being turned on. I've checked mobile, tablet, PC, and so far it's been reliable to do that, and it does stop it complaining. The only thing I find on PageSpeed is the only thing it doesn't add those attributes to is I've got an SVG file for my logo on my homepage, and PageSpeed twines at me about that not having a width and height attribute. It's tiddly small, so I don't care, to be honest, but there we go. I haven't messed with sprites, but further down again we can also enable lazy load and lazy load iframes as well. So if you've got an embedded map or an embedded third-party site somewhere or an extension, you can turn this on to lazy load them in, which helps again with PageSpeed. I find if you use JCH Optimize and you use the lazy load setting within PageBuilder, which I'll get to in a minute, it actually stops the CDN being used for the images. Now, not everybody uses a CDN clearly, but in here, once I get to it, I've got all this enabled as a push for HTTP2. It is enabled on my server and I've got it on. But on the CDN, I'm using Amazon CloudFront as a CDN platform. And if I use this and use the PageBuilder lazy load for images, it actually stops the images being loaded off the CDN. It keeps them back at my server. I have flagged that with JoomShaper, which they're looking at for hopefully some future fix. However, I always now use the lazy load within JCH anyway, which effectively does exactly the same thing. So it's all helping with page speed times and efficiency and stuff. CDNs do help a lot if you've got a busy site. Certainly, it really does. CloudFront is basically free for individuals. If you've got your own website, it's highly unlikely you're going to go above the free amount they give you. I think you get 50 gig transfer bandwidth every month as a freebie. I've not gone above that for individual sites. I have gone above that for all the sites I've got connected, but I do pay a little bit now every month for the bandwidth that they provide. But certainly, if you've got a busy site, it will really reduce the load on your server. And as you can expect, Amazon's platform is generally going to be an awful lot quicker at dishing content out than something you might have yourself, unless you've got thousands of pounds worth of hosting provision. You can, again, in this one, I'm one on my list of things to look at. You can actually get JCH to recode JPEG and PNG into WebP files, and that way it will mean that it's intelligent. So if somebody loads your website and their browser supports WebP, it will dish them out. If they load your website on a browser that doesn't support WebP, it will give them the original JPEG or PNG file type, which is really good. It's certainly even if you compress your JPEGs down really well, Google's beginning to pick them up as significant file size savings to use WebP. It's not huge on JPEG usually, some bigger than others. PNG I will steer away from as far as I can unless there's a real need to use transparency. Some of the older Mac browsers, some of the older Safari versions, if their Mac itself doesn't support the latest OS versions, then the Safari browser will struggle to, well, it won't support WebP. It's baked in at OS level rather than browser level, which is a bit of a pain. Safari's got a few fiddly issues with websites that I wish to just fix because it's a pain. And realistically, that's kind of it. I've not looked at the rest of it, and there you can integrate this one with the Joomla Page Cache plugin. I'm not entirely sure why you would want to use both, let's be honest with you, because this does the same thing so far as I know, and it certainly doesn't complain at me for other stuff as well. Permissions, don't need to worry about that one, but there's an awful lot in there that really helps. For the sake of it now, I'm going to test myself now, and I'm going to run my own site through PageSpeed Insight to see what happens. I certainly can't comment for the load on my server. When I was testing this again last night to have a quick look, I was getting 90 to 95% pass on desktop. Mobile is a challenge. Google likes to, it started to run these at 4G levels. For some reason, the current insights have now dropped back to 3G. And I'm not convinced in any way now that the majority of users, certainly in the UK where I am, there will not be anybody on a 3G connection, which is what this is tested on, and it's a bit frustrating. It talks about 3G there. No chance. 4G is so much faster than that. And it's a frustration that it twines about some of this one. So anyway, it is what it is. 50 at the moment on mobile. I look at my website and my mobile on 4G, and it does not take anywhere near 8 seconds to be interactive. It's as quick to me as a desktop version. Desktop, what are we on? 70. See what I mean? This is just Google being Google. I'd probably analyze that again, and it will come back at different levels. That's why these can sometimes be worth looking at, but sometimes you can get hung up on this too much. And yeah, there's the whole thing about Google what's the word there? The new term they've got for it at the moment, which has just fallen out of my head because I'm on a live video. Clearly, see, that's come back again and come back at 41. It goes to show how this varies across all of the different ways of doing it. The way that the user experience is now becoming a big thing. Test it yourself, get a few people else to test it. If it's not running slowly for you and others that load it, this is just an idea to make sure that some of the things that you can do, you've got running. It will sometimes flag useful checks like image sizes and stuff, so be sure you've not got any random massive images that you've forgotten to compress before you've uploaded them. I certainly do see a lot of sites where people are using the original photograph of their digital camera, which is 5,000 pixels by 4,000 pixels, and it's 10 meg, and they've got a page full of 5 photographs, and the website just crawls even on fiber. You're not going to get around that. You can't fix that issue. That's down to the way the page has been built and the user. You've just got to educate them as much as you can to try and help them understand why they need to be doing it differently to that one. This did this to me yesterday. Google PageBuilder just decided to not work anymore. One of those bizarre things. The other one you can look at as well is GT metrics. I'm always like, nah, these things are what they are. You can pop your website in there, and I'm just going to stop. What's always interesting to do, regardless of whether you want to look at page speed through Google or GT metrics yourself, check it before you start to do things, and then at the end, because that way you know what changes have made a difference to things. And be aware, if you're on a shared hosting platform, which, let's be honest, most people are, so you're using 123reg or GoDaddy or any of those, you don't have a dedicated provision. You've literally got a share of the performance of a server. So if somebody else is on that server and their website's really, really busy, it may impact on the performance of your own. So you can test this now when it's the middle of the afternoon. I could come back tonight at 10 o'clock and your site may be different performance because maybe it's quieter on that server. I do have my own server, that my client sites and my own run on just my server. That's just for me. So if I I can keep an eye performance and keep an eye what's going on and make sure that its spec levels are at where it needs to be. I got B on that at the moment. It will flag up one or two little bits and bobs in there. And what's not coming off of a HTTP one? Interesting. Those ones apparently. That's another one on my mind to look at some point, is to see whether I can actually just disable HTTP 1.1. I don't know what uses it now. It again seems to think I can resize some images to help a little bit. I probably can. I'm quite aware actually that I've got some PNGs there that probably don't need to be PNGs, and I have a feeling that my actual own image is a bit big. It doesn't have to be 1200 by 1400. It's smaller than it was, but I can come back and resize that a bit myself if I want. So that's an overview. By default, without any of that turned on, certainly your site will be slower. The native compression within Helix and gzip and the cache within Joomla are very, very good. I do find JCH is better, but it's not miles ahead. It's not like twice as good as the basic Joomla stuff. Joomla, the settings in Joomla are very, very good. I used JCH mainly initially just so I could start to use the CDN more efficiently. Also one or two other little bits and bobs in there. I know it fixes the Google font issue, for example. So there are benefits to it, but they're not massive. And if you're using the standard compression and cache within Joomla and you've got your hosting set to compress as well, you're ahead of the game, to be honest. The other one in PageBuilder itself, if you're not using JCH, you can go to the options and you can do lazy load. So if you want your images to only load, so the lazy load basically means if you load on this website now, the website will only load the images that you can see